Good morning, Anthony, and welcome to Sustainability Curated. And you're indeed welcome, because Sustainability Curated is on a mission to find like-minded people who are sustainability enthusiasts and working perhaps in their organisations or indeed independently to really canvass how we work towards a preferred future. Risk is very much at the heart of the sustainability curated ethos, and it is incredibly important for us all to collaborate together to find out how we work towards risk resilience, risk mitigation and risk adaptation. So you're indeed welcome today, and today you become a sustainability curator. So how exciting is that?
That's incredibly exciting. Well, Audrey, thank you so much. And to be here in Singapore, in the Sustainability Curated studio is amazing, and really appreciate the invitation. And yeah, likewise, love finding like-minded people in the sustainability and climate space. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Unfortunately, I don't have a badge or a T-shirt to hand you out, Anthony, but perhaps you could put Sustainability Curator at the top of your resume, which leads me on to ask a question about your background, because you have a very impressive and colourful career history. So as a self-proclaimed insurance nerd and sustainability crusader, I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued to find out how you have found yourself in the world of insurance.
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. And, I'm here, have been for the last 12 months, having joined Howden last September 23, because I believe insurance is it's the critical place to be right now in terms of how we catalyze and unlock the systems change that we need is one of, I think, the critical keys that has not yet, I think, been turned. My background, very quickly, 20 plus years as a lawyer, specializing in environment and then climate change since the late 90s, predominantly carbon markets. So it sort of started quite early, in the 90s, actually. I played quite a role in helping to unlock environmental liability insurance, but bringing in insurers and an MGA at that time who were determined to actually make the policies that insured environmental risk worth something, and they were quite innovative. And so I would involve them on a consultancy basis in quite a lot of our deals, and actually that resulted in actual policies being written as a result of those insurers getting very closely involved in understanding the risks and the transaction. I can never resist trying to sort of help make markets. So in my roles in the late 90s, noughties at some big law firms, did quite a lot of the market making around carbon markets. 10 years ago, stepped out into the not-for-profit world and was the CEO of Carbon Tracker, who had quite a impact, along with many others in the space, in transforming the way financial markets think about climate risk using high, level, robust quantitative financial analysis, and as well as stranded assets and the carbon bubble, the Carbon Tracker is most well known for. They played quite a big role working behind the scenes with the Bank of England in climate-related financial disclosure, and now we have TCFD, TNFD, and so on. Hopefully people will forgive us for that. And then 5 years of the World Economic Forum, building the industry decarbonisation platform, Mission Possible partnership, and then building an initiative. I got quite frustrated with how difficult it is when you're trying to, do the work that will rewire the systems change, to actually raise the money to support that work, particularly from philanthropy. And when I discovered the sort of Climate Works Foundation annual analysis showed that it was only about 2% of global philanthropy comes into climate and nature, I was shocked is probably an understatement if we consider the nature of the crises. And I helped build something at the World Economic Forum called Gaia, Giving to Amplify Earth Action. The idea was to create a clear model that philanthropy could more clearly see how they could have impact by putting money into the space around this idea, which in a sense, when we looked at the history of philanthropy, proved to be how philanthropy is most influential, quite often being the catalyst for the sort of big public-private action that makes big change, whether that's in public health, education, medical breakthroughs, you name it. And so we went, okay, we gave it a name, Public-Private Philanthropic Partnerships. And we said, if we're right, this will already be happening. And it was. And with McKinsey, we went out and mapped all of the public-private philanthropic partnerships. And we found many, many of them were trying to do this role of de-risking, trying to tackle risk as a hurdle to the flows of climate finance or climate action. And that made me think a lot about risk as a barrier, and then start to ask the question, well, why is that philanthropy doing this innovation? Where is the insurance industry? And serendipity, I was at a meeting with Rowan Douglas, CEO of Climate Risk and Resilience at Howden. We had this conversation, and he said, in typical Rowan style, the new Lilypad, they're taking a long-term view. They believe that, David Howden talks a lot about the fact that if insurance does not step up on this, it's going to renew itself into irrelevance, which means there will become a tipping point. And we're starting to see early signs of that, where things become uninsurable. So we need a paradigm shift. And Howden is a business, but I think what's quite fascinating about this approach is it understands that it cannot achieve its commercial objectives without taking a market-making approach, and actually really believe that's in the interests of the insurance industry as a whole. And because insurance, I think, as a mechanism is so critical to our modern society, it's actually critical, I think, to all of us.
So you would consider yourself as a little bit of a disruptor then?
Perhaps, but disruptor in the sense of systems change.
Positive disruption.
Positive disruption, looking for those nodes in the system where you can have the greatest sort of leverage.
Is opportunities lie where change is activated. And here's the thing, right now we're looking at a deep transformation, and transformations happen when market dynamics change and make room for disruption. And at the moment, we're looking at a compelling market disruption that will lead to transformation across not just our industry, but the entire financial ecosystem. Insurers, if I can be so bold to say, are important financial actors in that narrative, because they are the risk managers of the financial system, and as such have such a pivotal role to play in the transition, not only from a capital allocation perspective, but also the sharing of the deep domain knowledge that the industry has collectively, and the deep risk engineering experience that the industry boasts. So I'd like to understand a little bit more about Howden's viewpoint, understand more about this concept of creating a climate insurance marketplace, to dig into what you mean when you say insurers have an important role and are the enablers of the transition. I know you're here in Singapore doing a lot of work around risk awareness, and you're holding seminars on de-risking the transition. And I'd like to understand a little bit more about what you mean about that. And this notion of a paradigm shift is really interesting. I'd like to dig a little bit more into that. And in particular, what is meant by a paradigm shift and how risk management is prioritised. That's a really critical point that I'd like to highlight and learn a little bit more about. So I'm really itching to hear from you, Anthony.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the report, or it's actually a white paper as opposed to a report, because we're sort of setting out a proposition of what we believe, after speaking to a lot of people in the insurance sector and more broadly a lot of stakeholders, the paradigm shift that is needed for insurance to properly, the insurance sector to properly step up and de-risk the resilient net zero transition. I mean, in many ways, that's the sort of overarching sort of vision, if you like, for the climate risk and resilience team. and that we believe is a necessary precondition, the market making precondition for achieving our commercial objectives. And it's based on a very collaborative approach. I mean, if we're successful, everyone, including our competitors, is going to benefit from this. And that's absolutely okay, because, we will not achieve our commercial objectives without this paradigm shift. And so we set out with BCG to sort of really think through what are the key elements of that paradigm shift that are needed. A longer, more strategic approach in the way, not just the insurers, but actually the buyers, the demand side. We don't, in any of these systems change, in any systems change within a sector of the economy, whether that is finance, steel, shipping, you can't just do that by either a demand-led or a supply-led approach. I learned this at the World Economic Forum in the industry piece. So we first built the Mission Possible partnership that focused on the industry roadmaps for the supply side, steel sector, for example. But they're not going to build those green steel plants to 100 by 2030 unless they know there's going to be people to buy that green steel. So that then led to a realization we had to create something that would basically get companies to sign up to advance purchase commitments for green steel, freight, cement. And that was the First Movers Coalition that we developed with the John Kerry team. And we're taking a similar approach here. And so, as well as insurers taking that longer term approach and not just thinking about the capacity and the risks that are needed in the next 12 months for the next renewal, they're thinking, and this is probably radical, should be longer, but they're thinking, well, what's needed in 2030, in 2031, in 2032? And for the first time in history, the insurance industry, in a sense, has an idea of what that change is like, with all of the scenarios and pathways and forecasts that are out there that every other sector has. I think one of the things that I think illustrates the difference here is that almost every other sector of the economy, including finance, has a sort of roadmap to net zero for 2050. The insurance industry as a sector does not, and it needs that. So that longer term strategic approach for the demand side, banks, corporates, governments, they need to be thinking much more strategically about insurance, and that actually insurance is a critical counterpoint. It is part of the financial sector. It is still capital. It's just contingent capital. And so if you want to mobilize the amounts of climate finance we need, and there'll be the main, the number one negotiating point for a new, commitment on climate finance at COP29 in Baku, the finance COP, then you need to recognize that insurance is a fundamental part of finance. It's been a major blind spot, but it's a critical enabler. It is still capital. It's actually a fundamental part of the foundation to the capital stack.
Wow, there's so much in that there.
And I've not even covered all of the key points in the report. I hope everyone will read it. There
is so much in that. Moving away from short-termism towards more systems thinking is definitely a transition that the insurance market needs to take. Also, what you said there about the pivotal role of insurers in encouraging finance. When we look at the amount of clean tech innovation that is required for us to meet our net zero goals, or indeed on the supply chain side, the amount of minerals, critical materials that are needed, this all needs finance to take this forward.
And it needs insurance.
And it needs insurance, because insurance will enable the finance, because the investors need the security of risk transfer vehicles. So when I put that into a bigger picture, I think about who's securing the insurers. So when we look at our marketplace and we look at primary insurers being supported by reinsurers who are supported by the retro markets, we have this system of security. So the investors are looking for insurers for that stability, for them to then make their investment decisions. So what you said about risk management what the report said about risk management and how we need a paradigm shift in how we view risk management.
Absolutely.
I want to put that in the context of how we help the insurance community get their security. Because the insurance community have a lot of weight on their shoulders at the moment. There's a lot of pressure on how the insurance community responds to nascent technology, to the accelerating risk landscape, to the crises that insurability is creating under insurance, the insurance protection gap. So for me, we need to start looking beyond risk transfer, and we need to start looking at risk resilience, risk adaptation, and risk management. So how do we do that? How do we instill that conversation into early stage development of projects? And this is a bit of a spicy question, actually. I do apologise, but who pays for that in our new climate ecosystem? Because insurers do need to step up in terms of supporting new prototypical machinery and technology, but they also need comfort in how we manage that. They need to get their arms around the risk exposure. They need more data. They need more climate data. They need more risk engineering spend.
Absolutely.
So as a broker, how do we organise ourselves as an insurance ecosystem and beyond the insurance to place importance on risk management?
Oh, that is. There's a lot in that. And as you say, that's a spicy question. I'll do my best. Maybe hit some of the headlines. I mean, you have to take a broad view of what insurance is. I mean, ultimately, insurance, at its simplest, is a mechanism for pooling risk, sharing risk. And we do that in society in many different ways. And in many ways within which we share risk for the benefit of society. Society can function, can progress. Governments and public money is involved. I mean, public medical systems like the NHS, love it or hate it, good or bad, in the UK. Social security systems, where in different countries you pay a form of social security, national insurance in the UK, where you have a basic minimum for pensions that everyone pays into. Those are all forms of insurance. When risks become too big for the private sector to take on alone, governments, traditionally have stepped in, or that's one of the things that we say in the bigger picture report. That assumption, we cannot rely on that assumption in future as these risks get bigger and bigger. So I mean, flood re in the UK, where the government basically is insurer of last resort for domestic properties in areas with a high flood risk. Governments started to send signals that they may not renew that. So, and we're seeing, similar situations in California and Florida and so on, where there just isn't enough public money for the risk. And so we have got to think, again, long-term and more strategically. If the insurance industry was able to develop a pathway in consultation with the demand side, businesses, finance, and governments, there's probably a lot of ways in which we get there. I mean, just take, for example, the huge amounts of public money that's coming from MDBs, DFIs, donor countries into trying to mobilize climate finance in the developing world, even in major emerging economies, where it's MDBs and DFIs that are de-risking projects to attract private finance through mechanisms such as blended finance, concessionary finance. Well, why are we not taking those same mechanisms and learnings and applying them to insurance to accelerate the development of insurance in some sort of public-private arrangement? Not with the objective that it's always going to be the public money that's kind of providing the floor, but to accelerate the development and risk appetite of the insurance sector, because we cannot operate, most businesses cannot operate without insurance. And most if you move into new technologies that have been untested, then of course companies are going to be nervous about taking them up until they've got a number of years of experience. But and if you've ever sat on an investment committee or advised an investment committee, as I have in both cases, you know that when you do not have years of data for a technology or new approach or market, you get very nervous. Now, if you say, well, don't worry, we can insure that risk, that makes a huge difference in terms of giving comfort. But we haven't got time in this transition, if we're to deploy these technologies at speed, to wait till you've got 20, 30 years or even 10 years of data. We're hearing about a lot of companies who develop exciting new technologies still in sort of startup mode. They're still either, funded through VC or private equity capital, which is very expensive. And they're being asked by buyers of that technology to put significant chunks of that capital in escrow in case something goes wrong under the contracts, because they're not sort of AAA rated companies. So the insurance industry, probably through credit risk type insurance models, could sort of help there. So that there's a lot of innovation. And there's probably a lot of existing products which will cover a lot of risks. But again, there's a lack of understanding. Insurers are not brought in early enough. The things that we are doing, so we've done the report and we've talked about the report, but the world is full of reports. The really critical issue is then what do you do with the recommendations in that report? How do you create a way in which to build a community, to build actors who will put into practice? And so as Howden, again, the UN high-level champions for climate change and the team that supports them, the high-level champions, to build an enabling climate insurance breakthrough. And the key objective of that is to build a community of insurers, but not to talk to themselves, but actually to engage them through the high-level champions network with all of those communities of companies working in different sectors like energy, like the built environment, like automotive, nature, carbon markets, and also on the adaptation, physical risk, resilience side, and bring insurance to the table, because finance is already at the table, and have insurance at the table when you're talking about risks. A lot of these conversations are about risk, but insurance is not at that top table.
I agree. And what I'm hearing from you, Anthony, is that we need to attract or reimagine the deployment of capital first and foremost. So how capital is allocated, and the beauty of blended finance is getting investors and government together to tackle now the world's greatest problems, and insurance, being an important financial actor in that value chain, also has to come to that table. And the broker, as if you don't mind me saying so, often in the insurance value chain is the gateway to the client relationship and the client development. So I feel that your point on early engagement, to be able to encourage the insurers' seat at the table, is incredibly important. So that's really exciting to hear you take that approach. I just want to touch on, again, this concept of the great enabler, insurance being the great enabler. And I feel like when I say that, we should have some music or something playing. Elsa, perhaps you could feed that in.
Great enabler.
The great enabler. Build some suspense. The great enabler, and you talked also about a paradigm shift in how we deploy capital capacity, a paradigm shift in how we deploy and think about risk management. Now that takes me on to my next question, which is about innovation. Mm-hmm. So with increased risk, there is always, for insurers, increased opportunity, and the extent of opportunity to think differently, to innovate, is incredible at the moment. We have new emerging risks, not just climate change, but AI and the risks that come with the technical innovations that are happening at the moment, there is an incredible opportunity for insurers to think a little bit differently. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that with new innovations in alternative risk transfer. We're seeing that with the proliferation of new insurance vehicles like parametrics, which is beautifully responding to the rise in natural catastrophes and the unpredictability of our weather systems. We're seeing that, and you mentioned DFIs and the importance of new financial actors spearheading change. And the insurance market is in the process of looking at things like bonds, like sustainability bonds, like green bonds, like social bonds. And then you also mentioned the carbon markets, which of course is quite an interesting and again a spicy topic, because of course it's quite controversial. But there is a definite need for insurance there. There is a definite insurable interest in the carbon exchange. So there is excitement and noise in the insurance market about how we address that. So with increased risk, there is always increased opportunity. And as an insurance ecosystem, we are no strangers to the concept of pulling together to de-risk, or pulling together to support new innovation, to lead and to follow, to have the strength to lead in a new endeavour and for insurers to follow it. And I feel that the broker has great oversight of what's happening in the marketplace. So without giving away any IP, because we wouldn't want you to do that, but what I want to understand is where you're seeing innovation being deployed with regards to risk transfer products and also risk management services, but also what are the gaps? Where do we need to move next? What do we need to think about more? There's
a lot in that. So, but let's maybe again try and hit some of the, it's a fantastic question, and I think overview of the challenge we face. In many ways, it's about we need a time traveling DeLorean. In many ways, this is not about, I think, the insurance industry discovering sort of a new way of being. It's about rediscovering its innovative roots. The way in which the insurance industry operates today, and probably has done for the last 50 plus years, is not the way it always operated. Once upon a time, Industrial Revolution, when we opened up global trade, the insurance industry was not a separate thing. It was an integral part of finance. It was people with money, financiers, investors, who recognized that if they were investing, we go right the way back to those coffee houses in sort of, the east part of the city of London, Square Mile. These were not separate insurers. They were people investing in ships and cargoes. But then they recognized that there was a huge risk of them individually being wiped out unless they pooled that risk with their competitors. And so they knew there were certain coffee houses where you go and you'd meet your sort of competitors. And then, of course, it developed into, people who'd broker that and bring those people together. And then it sort of separated out. But it's an integral part of finance. The money that flows from the capital markets into insurance is not a different type of money to the money that's invested. It is still capital. It is deployed in a contingent way through the insurance market. And the insurance market ultimately has access to the same very, very big pools of capital, which is, again, why we need those forward roadmaps, and we need to start thinking on a much longer basis about the amount of cover that's needed. And there's no excuse, because we have the pathways. We know how much capital is committed between now and 2030, for example, and beyond, not just the aspirational, what we should be doing. So I think that's a critical piece, rediscovering that innovative approach. But I think, again, not just the insurers, the people who use insurance, for whom insurance is critical, have to start thinking more strategically about it and bringing insurers into the conversations much earlier, because there's a lot more insurers can do. And actually, I think a big part of this will just be a better understanding of what's already available and starting to ask for those products in project financings and infrastructure investment in sort of new technologies. Now, one of the reasons I'm here in Singapore is I have an adjunct professor role with the Singapore Institute for Technology. So as well as my deputy chair at Climate Risk and Resilience within Howden and my role with high-level champions as co-lead for Insurance, I'm also an adjunct professor at SIT. And SIT asked me to come here and as part of their sustainability day yesterday for their 10-year anniversary. And I have my SIT, Singapore Institute for Technology, 10-year anniversary tie on. We pulled together a de-risking workshop. And it was really exciting because we pulled together people from the Singapore government, from sort of the finance side, from the environment sustainability side. We had people from one of the regional MDBs. We had people from finance and banks. We had people from the corporate sector. And one of the biggest issues that sort of, I think, came out of all of that was what role can the insurance industry play in terms of making sense of, I think, the overwhelming disparity in ESG, in data that's coming out of the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, the Nature Equivalent, Carbon Disclosure Project, green accounting. I mean, we have no shortage of, I think, data in this space. Question whether some of it is the right sort of data. But it's a little bit like that, that old, Bible story, the Tower of Babel. Everybody is speaking a different language and nobody necessarily understands. And it's just a noise. And we've lost that ability to speak the common language. And what is the common language?
I love that. I love that because for me, whether you're an ESG enthusiast or a naysayer, whether you're excited about the climate lawsuit and backlash or backsliding that's happening at the moment or not, you cannot deny that ESG gives us a lens for which we can see risk through.
Yes, but it's qualitative. And I think this is, so I had I had a really interesting chat many months ago now with the team that runs the Climate Governance Initiative at Hughes Hall in Cambridge, and they're the umbrella for the Chapter Zeros. And if you know, the Chapter Zeros are the groups, there's one here in Singapore. These are the groups that work with boards, particularly non-executive directors, to raise their understanding of these issues, and so to develop climate competent boards. And one of the big feedbacks they're getting, though, is nobody is giving them a sort of a cost of climate risk, which would be transformative in what they could do as board members and even C-suite executives. And so to my point, again, what is, this is a question, and it's not a trick question. What is the common language that anybody who's making an investment decision, anyone who's making a serious business or commercial decision, even governments who deploy public money, what is the common language they all speak? And it's not English. It's not Chinese.
Profit.
Dollars.
Profit.
And dollars. What we have not done is we have not worked out how to convert all of that data from a qualitative issue, which tells us we've got a big problem, but does not transform into the system within which we operate, and so therefore work within the system into a dollar amount. And it's easier said than done, but we have to work out how to do that on a forward-looking basis. We have to take all of those data sets, all of those methodologies. We have to use all the tools. We've got the AI tools and machine learning tools. We have to take all of those models, both physical and economic, in terms of forward pathways, scenarios, and so on, and work out how to bring all of that together to develop an ability on a forward-looking basis, not just 1 year, but in the way we look at the cost of, say, and I hate to say it, but let's just say power prices, oil, coffee beans, freight prices, a forward price curve, and who is the industry, the one industry whose job it is to convert risk using data on a data-driven basis into dollars and actually allow you to buy a product that protects you against that risk. It's the insurance industry. And I think that is one of the most fundamental, I think, pillars to this. Now, this is part of our vision. As I said, easier said than done. We'll probably have to do it in sort of steps. But in New York on Monday, the 23rd, we will be announcing a big new partnership with a major technology company.
Oh, exciting.
Around how, to do this.
I absolutely love that you've taken our conversation down that trajectory, because I am a great believer in the democratization of risk data. Now, that again is a little bit controversial because, of course, the ownership of data often leads to great profitability. And we only need to look at the digital data revolution of the last 20 years to evidence that. But I think what you're saying is that we need less inconsistency with regards to data and more of a universal view of data so that we can price adequately. Am I hearing you correctly?
Well, yeah. I mean, imagine if we had the plethora of different approaches and standards for accounting. I mean, we would, the world would be, from a corporate, perspective, it wouldn't work. You would have no sort of international markets or ability to operate within a sort of global corporate system. So accounting and a common approach to that. Okay, I think it's two standards, but and the ability to convert that into what it means in terms of dollars and cents, pounds and pence, yen and whatever the subset of yen is, renminbi, et cetera, is absolutely critical.
And I think when we look at the supply chain disruption and supply chain vulnerability that we're experiencing at the moment, and how that is a huge barrier to our net zero ambitions, the clean tech revolution that we need is predicated on the harmonization of supply chains. And I think more has to be done for us to be able to, like you say, get qualitative data about Scope 3 emissions, and also how we build supply chain models to then be able to build risk management strategies around that.
Absolutely.
And qualitative risk strategies on how we not only protect our own reputation and our own portfolio optimization, but how we prevent systemic exposure. So there's so much in that, and I'm conscious of time, so I will wrap up now. And I just want to...
I just want to say two very quick things on that very quickly. I think the supply chain piece is absolutely right. I'm glad you sort of, hit on that in the Scope 3 piece, because I think a lot of major corporates who've made net zero commitments, including Scope 3, are obviously trying to work down their supply chains. And what they're discovering is that risk and concerns about new technologies and fears around that, and that their smaller suppliers do not have access to the same sort of warranties, insurances, etc., do not have the same intuitive, understanding of these new technologies, electric trucks, for example, for sort of last mile or, medium level delivery, is becoming a major barrier. The other piece in terms of new technologies, I cannot recommend highly enough some of the reports and work that the Mariam, who leads climate at the Geneva Association, is doing. They're doing some fantastic work with the insurance sector on how to sort of accelerate and build a sort of framework for how you can insure much more quickly new technologies.
No, absolutely. And I think this idea of knowledge and expertise sharing is incredibly important to your and Howden's vision of creating that climate marketplace, I think is what you call it, which is very powerful, a climate marketplace that looks beyond the insurance relationships that we are so lucky to have, but towards new relationships with investors, with governments, with NGOs. And I'd like to think that in your pursuit of a climate marketplace, you will build 3 really important pillars built around relationships, principles, and then action.
Well, and also, one, I would say, Howden cannot do this on its own. or own this. We can light the touch paper, catalyze it, but we need to work with the whole market. Of taking a very broad approach to, broking. So I think that's, this can't be the Howden thing. We can light the touch paper, and then hopefully, we catalyze all of this. So I think that's absolutely critical. And this has got to be a paradigm shift. It's not quite becomes the insurance market, because it's the world, this world of physical change that's accelerating, and of economic change is it's the hand we have been dealt. And, one of the biggest things you always have to, recognize is the reality around you. And I think that's what the insurance industry, needs to do. Every other part of the economy has now set out their pathways to net zero, and the insurance industry needs to do the same. I think one of the exciting things about Howden as well in our approach to this, because we've developed a multidisciplinary team, as you know, is also we don't have all the answers, but actually we have a great collection about a great multidisciplinary collection of expertise we have built over the last sort of year and a half, and we are entirely open to getting in there and understanding those risks alongside, clients who are struggling with those risks, and trying to work with them to find solutions, whether that's existing products that are out there in the market, which we can go out and sort of access, or whether that's new approaches, might not be risk transfer products, or whether we can take existing products and, so this is a more likely solution and evolve them, or whether there in some cases there's total new innovation required, and we've been doing a lot of that as well.
Because we are lucky in insurance when we look at innovation, and if we look at clean tech again, we actually have a curation of well-developed products already that can respond to construction and operational risks emanating from new technology, from solar PV to wind to the more nascent technology such as geothermal or tidal, and all the excitement around hydrogen and alternative fuels. We have a suite of products already that can be utilised and used.
Well, and I must share with you the SIT workshop yesterday, the ESG data and de-risking workshop. Timothy from Munich Re is based here in Singapore as the sort of regional head of renewables. He presented an amazing set of slides that took solar PV as a case study, in terms of set out the whole supply chain, and this could apply to any technology, and then looked at how the insurance industry think about the different risks and how they approach the different risks, from literally the critical minerals and supply chains to the manufacture, to the supply and warranty of that, to the project developer, financiers, operators, offtake, and then broke all of that down under those heads of risk into the different products available. I think for people who don't fully understand the way the insurance industry thinks and is structured and approaches risk, it was a really, really helpful sort of framing and fire starter for the conversation yesterday.
Yeah, that's really important to acknowledge the extent of appetite there is at the moment within the insurance community to champion new technology. And yes, we do need more innovation around perhaps liability products and performance related products, but for pure physical and property risks, and for physical damage and indeed business interruption, we have a perfect suite of products already. And perhaps what is needed is increased appetite. And for that, again, I go back to my point that that's a big responsibility for insurers, and of course has to be met with more risk management
Absolutely.
So that the insurer can be comfortable going into unknown waters, or new areas of innovation from a power and energy perspective. But what we do have is we have inspiration to take from the very thing that we're trying to disrupt. So when we look at the oil and gas industry, which is, of course, what we need to move away from, we cannot continue to live out with planetary boundaries. So there does have to be a paradigm shift in how we source energy. But if we look at the incredible engineering and the incredible the ingenuity of mankind, really, when we look at the proliferation of the oil and gas industry and where it is now, and the extent of revenue that is surrounding that industry. When we look at the huge task we have ahead with the renewable sector, we as an insurance community have to take comfort in the pivotal role that we played as insurers in getting the oil and gas industry to where it is, and think about it as not so much a transition away from the bad to the good, because we now have the privilege of more information and data to understand the way in which we need to change.
Yes.
But rather than a transition from bad to good, but a maturity from something that was a great achievement, and where, risk engineering, it has to be applauded. And we have all the experience of that. 160 years it took the oil and gas industry to get to where it is now.
But not without, a huge amount actually, of government support.
Of course.
And even today, major amounts of subsidies. So absolutely. But we have to do the clean energy piece much faster. And I believe, because we haven't got time for people to be resisting the change, we also have to show those companies, those investors, all of those people, because it's the just transition as well, a future that works for them, that they need to embrace and let go of the current products. And I think one of the things that could be most powerful, if we actually start thinking longer term about risk and the cost of risk and a forward price curve for risk, in exactly the same way we have for every other commodity and service that is critical for the operation of a business or government, except for insurance, and it doesn't have to be that way. A forward price curve, I believe, would start to tell you and send a signal that the cost of staying in many of those high carbon businesses and products is only going one way up. Whereas the cost of risk associated with many of the new technologies, yes, there might be a higher risk now. You've got less knowledge around how they operate and some of the problems you're going to run into. But the curve would tell you that, as a trend, the cost of risk around those new technologies and approaches and spending on adaptation and resilience is going to go down and will reduce your forward risk price or your forward cost of risk.
Absolutely. The power of data again, Anthony.
Exactly.
And I think
through a data-driven industry like the insurance industry, thinking longer term.
And that systemic shift in thinking and the systems thinking that's required within the private sector is also needed within the public sector as well. And you've hit on a very important point, that a driver of change will be governance, and will be concessionary governance and government working together in partnership with financial actors. So I think, there's so much, and I think we could do another 3 or 4 vlogcasts on some of those topics. But thank you very much for your time today. I really do wish you a great time in Singapore, and I hope you go back to Europe with inspiration and a new view of the ASEAN market and the opportunities that exist here.
Singapore is such the ecosystem here, the sort of the way in which people are embracing this and able to work together collectively. I'm going back with so much excitement. And this will be a critical center for the Howard and Climate Risk and Resilience team as we sort of develop. So, and we're going to work with the government here, I think, to really build Singapore as a regional center of excellence for climate insurance. So very, very exciting. Thank you so much for asking me to come on and talk with you.
No, that's very exciting. Thank you very much, Anthony. Thank you.